September 3rd, 1984. A Tuesday. The late summer sun was just beginning to set over upstate New York as a white station wagon pulled into the parking lot of State University of New York at Geneseo. Inside the car, 18-year-old Chris DiCesare and his father Vito. Chris was excited, nervous. This was it. His fresh start. College. Freedom. The beginning of everything he'd been working toward. Chris was an athlete, a runner, fast, really fast. He'd earned a track and field scholarship to SUNY Geneseo, and his dream? The Olympics. He'd trained for years, pushed his body to the limit, and now, finally, he was here. His father helped him carry boxes up to his dorm. Erie Hall. 4th floor, room C2D1. It was a standard dorm room, 2 beds, 2 desks, a window overlooking the campus quad. Nothing special. Chris said goodbye to his dad, hugged him, thanked him, and then Vito DiCesare drove away. Chris stood in his new room, alone, looking around. His roommate, a guy named Paul, hadn't arrived yet. He started unpacking. Hanging posters, making the bed, settling in, and for the first 3 days. Everything was perfect, but on the 4th day, something changed. And for the next year, Chris DiCesare would live in absolute terror because something in that room wanted him, and it wouldn't stop until it got what it came for. Let me tell you about those first 3 days. Chris was happy, really happy. He met people immediately. That's the thing about college. Everyone's friendly at first. Everyone's looking for friends. His neighbor across the hall was a guy named Jeff Ungar. Jeff was into photography, always had a camera around his neck. They hit it off right away. Down the hall, Linda Kalasinski, friendly, outgoing, part of the welcome committee, and Craig Norris, another track athlete. They'd be training together. Chris's roommate Paul finally arrived on day 2. Nice guy, quiet, studying pre-med. Everything felt normal, good. This was college. This was what he'd been waiting for. Chris attended orientation, picked up his class schedule, explored campus. SUNY Geneseo was beautiful, founded in 1871. Historic buildings, tree-lined paths, the kind of place you see in college brochures. And every night, Chris would fall asleep in room C2D1, exhausted from the day, excited about the next. His heartbeat would slow, his breathing would deepen, and he'd drift off into peaceful sleep. But on September 6th, day 4, that changed. It was late. Maybe 11 p.m. Chris was alone in the room. Paul had gone to a party or something. Chris had stayed back. He had an early morning run planned. He was sitting at his desk organizing his class notes. The dorm was quiet. Most people were either out or already asleep. And then he heard it, a whisper, soft, barely audible, but clear. He stopped writing, looked up. Hello? Nothing. He shook his head. Probably someone in the hallway. Or maybe he imagined it. He went back to his notes. And then, whisper, closer this time. Chris DiCesare. Okay. That was weird. His full name. Whispered. In his room. He stood up, looked around. Paul, is that you? Very funny, man. Silence. The window was closed. The door was closed. He was alone. Chris walked to the door, opened it, looked down the hallway. A few people walking around. Music playing from someone's room. Normal college stuff. Nobody was paying attention to him. He closed the door, locked it. Okay, you're just tired. First week of college. Your brain's playing tricks on you. He said it out loud, to convince himself. He brushed his teeth, changed into his running clothes for tomorrow, set his alarm, got into bed, and as he lay there in the darkness, trying to fall asleep, he heard it again. Chris's eyes snapped open. His whole body went rigid. That whisper. It was right next to his bed, inches from his ear. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. And then, nothing, silence. He lay there for hours, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, heart pounding, waiting for it to happen again. It didn't. But sleep? Sleep didn't come that night. The next few days were strange. Chris tried to convince himself it was nothing. Stress, exhaustion, new environment. But the whispers kept happening. Always when he was alone, always saying his name, sometimes in the dorm room, sometimes while he was running on the trails around campus. He'd be mid-run, completely alone on a forest trail, and he'd hear it. Chris, he'd stop, look around, nobody there. It was getting to him. His performance in practice started slipping. His coach noticed. "DiCesare, you okay? You seem distracted." "Yeah, coach, I'm fine. Just adjusting." But he wasn't fine. And then came October 4th. 3 weeks after moving in, Chris and Paul were both in the room. It was a Thursday night. Paul was studying for a biology exam. Chris was trying to read a book for his English class, and then the temperature dropped. Chris looked up from his book. He could see his breath. In October, in an indoor dorm room with working heat. "Paul, do you feel that?" Paul looked up. "Feel what?" "It's freezing." Paul frowned. "Dude, it's like 70 degrees in here. Are you getting sick or something?" But Chris's breath was visible. Fog coming out of his mouth with every exhale, and then he saw it. In the corner of the room, a shadow, but not a normal shadow. This was three-dimensional, solid, dense, about 6 feet tall, human-shaped, but the features, they were blurred, undefined. Like someone had taken a person and drained all the light from them. "Paul," Chris's voice was barely a whisper. "Do you see that?" Paul looked where Chris was pointing. Oh my God, Paul saw it too. The shadow figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It just stood there, watching them. And then Paul did what any rational person would do. He ran. Chris was left alone with it. He couldn't move, couldn't speak. His body was frozen. The shadow figure tilted its head, slowly, deliberately, like it was studying him, and then it disappeared. Not faded, not walked away, just gone. In an instant, Chris gasped. His legs gave out. He collapsed onto his bed, shaking. Paul never came back to room C2D1. He moved back home with his parents the next day. By mid-October, Chris was a mess. He wasn't sleeping. He was barely eating. His grades were slipping. His running times were getting worse. And the whispers? They were constant now. But he hadn't told anyone. Not his friends, not his dad, nobody. Because who would believe him? Then came October 23rd. There was an announcement on campus, a special lecture that evening in the main auditorium. Guest speakers, Ed and Lorraine Warren. Chris had heard of them. Everyone had. They were famous paranormal investigators. They'd investigated the Amityville horror house, the Annabelle doll, dozens of hauntings and possessions. Chris's friends wanted to go. Jeff, Linda, Craig. "Come on, man. It'll be fun. Scary stories, you know." Chris almost said no, but something told him he needed to be there. The auditorium was packed. Maybe 400 students. Ed and Lorraine Warren took the stage. Ed was in his mid-50s, stocky, confident. Lorraine was elegant, kind-faced, with graying hair. Ed spoke first. He told stories about their investigations, showed slides, talked about demons and spirits and the difference between them. Lorraine spoke about her gift. She was a clairvoyant, she explained. She could see things others couldn't, feel things. And as she spoke, Chris felt it. That same cold feeling, the presence. It was in the auditorium, right behind him. After the lecture, there was a Q&A session. Then students were invited to come up and meet the Warrens. Chris's friends wanted to go up, get autographs, take photos. Chris hesitated, but Jeff pushed him forward. "Come on, dude. When are you gonna meet real ghost hunters again?" They waited in line. Chris's heart was pounding. Thomas Boyd, Tommy. Chris realized the entity haunting him wasn't just some random ghost, it was Lieutenant Thomas Boyd, a revolutionary. War soldier who had been brutally murdered on this very ground over 200 years ago. And Chris had been running past his torture tree every single day. Chris needed to know more. He dove deeper into the historical records, journals, military reports, anything he could find about Thomas Boyd, and what he discovered broke his heart. Lieutenant Thomas Boyd wasn't just a soldier. He was 23 years old, young, about Chris's age. He was a surveyor, an explorer, brave, respected by his men. On September 13, 1779, General John Sullivan sent Boyd and 26 men on a reconnaissance mission. They were supposed to scout ahead, report back on enemy positions, but they were ambushed. Most of Boyd's men were killed immediately. Boyd and Sergeant Michael Parker were captured alive. The Seneca warriors took them to a village called Little Beardstown. What happened next was documented by soldiers who found their bodies the following day. Boyd was tied to a small tree, later called the torture tree. They pulled out his fingernails one by one, cut off his nose, gouged out his eyes, cut out his tongue so he couldn't scream. Then they cut open his abdomen and pulled out his intestines while he was still alive. Thomas Boyd died in unimaginable agony, and according to legend, his spirit never left. Chris understood now. Tommy wasn't evil. He was in pain. He'd been tortured, murdered, and his spirit was trapped here, reliving that trauma over and over again, and somehow Chris had become connected to him. But why? Why Chris specifically? Chris went to see Father Charles Manning, the campus priest. Father Manning listened to everything. The whispers, the attacks, the historical connection. And then he said something that changed Chris's understanding completely. "Chris, when were you born?" "September 14th, 1966. Father Manning nodded slowly. "September 14th. The exact date Thomas Boyd was killed. September 14th, 1779. Chris felt his blood run cold. "You think Tommy is attached to me because we share the same birthday?" "Not just that," Father Manning said. "You're an athlete, a runner. Boyd was a surveyor. He would have been incredibly fit. Probably ran miles every day. You're both young men, similar age, similar build. You think Tommy sees himself in me? I think Tommy has been waiting for 200 years. And when you arrived, someone who mirrors him in so many ways, born on the anniversary of his death, he finally found someone who could understand his pain. What does he want from me?" Father Manning looked Chris in the eyes. He wants you to acknowledge him, to remember him, to make sure his story isn't forgotten. April 16th, 1985. Chris had been haunted for 7 months. He'd lost weight, barely sleeping. His grades were terrible. His running career was basically over, but after learning Tommy's story, something shifted. Chris decided to go to the torture tree. alone. Jeff begged him not to. "Dude, are you crazy? That's where Tommy died." "I know," Chris said. "That's exactly why I need to go." It was late afternoon, golden hour. The sun was setting through the trees. Chris ran the trail, the same trail he'd run hundreds of times before. He reached the tree. It was old, gnarled, twisted in unnatural ways, like it had absorbed the pain of what happened there. A small plaque marked the spot. Most students walked right past it without noticing. Chris stood in front of the tree, and he spoke out loud. "Tommy, Thomas Boyd, I know you're here. I know what happened to you, and I'm sorry. I'm sorry you died the way you did. I'm sorry nobody remembered you. I'm sorry you've been alone for so long, but you need to let me go. You need to let yourself go. You don't belong here anymore." The temperature dropped further. Chris could see his breath, and then he felt it. The presence, right behind him, but this time, Chris didn't run. He turned around, and there, standing between the trees, was the dark figure, Tommy. But this time, Chris could see him more clearly, not a shadow. A man, young, dark hair, wearing what looked like a Revolutionary War uniform. His face was sad, not angry, just lost. "I see you, Tommy," Chris whispered. "I see you, and I won't forget you. I promise." And then Tommy did something Chris never expected. He smiled. Just a small, sad smile. And then he started to fade. Not disappear violently. Just gently fade. Like sunlight slowly dimming, Chris watched as Tommy became more and more transparent until he was gone. Chris stood there for a long time, crying, not from fear, from relief, from sadness, from release. He walked back to campus, and for the first time in 7 months, he felt alone, truly alone. Tommy was gone. After that day, the haunting stopped, completely. No more whispers, no more shadows, no more cold spots or scratches. Chris moved back into a dorm room. Not C2D1, he couldn't go back there. But a new room, a fresh start. He finished his degree. Graduated in 1988. His running career never fully recovered. The haunting had taken too much from him physically and mentally. The Olympics remained a dream, but he survived. In the years that followed, Chris wrote about his experience. Books, articles, trying to process what had happened. He appeared on paranormal shows, unsolved mysteries, sightings. Later, paranormal witness. Some people believed him. Others called him a liar, attention seeker, mentally ill. But Chris didn't care. He knew what happened. He lived it. Jeff Ungar kept the photographs, the evidence. And decades later, when Netflix approached Chris about telling his story, he said yes. Netflix logo on, October 7th, 2025. True Haunting premiered worldwide. 3 episodes dedicated to Chris DiCesare's story. Interviews with Chris himself, now 58 years old. Interviews with Jeff, Father Manning, other witnesses, reenactments of the haunting, the actual photographs, audio recordings they'd made of the whispers, everything. And for the first time, millions of people learned about Lieutenant Thomas Boyd, the young soldier who died horribly over 200 years. Ego, who was forgotten by history, until an 18-year-old college student promised to remember him. Chris DiCesare still lives in upstate New York. He's 58 years old now, married, has kids. He never experienced paranormal activity again after that day at the torture tree. But he visits SUNY Geneseo once a year, every September 14th, the anniversary of Thomas Boyd's death and his own birthday. He goes to the Parker Boyd Memorial, stands at the torture tree, and he says a prayer, not for himself, for Tommy, because he made a promise, and Chris DiCesare keeps his promises. As for room C2D1 in Erie Hall, it still exists. Students still live there, and some of them report strange things, whispers in the night. Cold, spots, a sense of being watched, but none as severe as what Chris experienced. Maybe because Tommy found what he was looking for, someone who would remember, someone who would tell his story, and now you know it too. Outrow. That's the true story behind Netflix's True Haunting. One college student, one Revolutionary War ghost, 7 months of terror, and a promise that finally brought peace. If you want more true Netflix horror stories, subscribe. Hit that bell notification and leave a comment. Do you believe Chris's story? Have you ever experienced something paranormal? True Haunting is streaming on Netflix right now. All 5 episodes. Go watch it. See the actual evidence. Hear Chris tell his story in his own words. And if you're ever at SUNY Geneseo, visit the Parker Boyd Memorial. Stand at the torture tree. And remember, Lieutenant Thomas Boyd, because some spirits just want to be remembered. Thanks for watching. Stay safe. And remember, history isn't just in books. Sometimes it's still here, watching, waiting, hoping someone will finally listen.